Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Ask SplitSuit a Question. I'm James SplitSuit Sweeney here for thepokerbank.com, and today we're going to answer one of your questions. So today's question comes from Ron K, and it's part 2 in a 3-part question. And Ron says, I think a good idea for a video is adjusting ranges, depending on the players around you and their stack sizes. When should we ISO limpers? When should we not? So Ron, that's a great question, and just to make sure we're all on the same page, an isolation is when there are one or more limpers, and then we raise in an effort to isolate them and get them heads up to ourselves. Now, there's a bunch of things that go into an isolation, and since you didn't give me a very specific example, I'm just going to talk about isolating in a more general and conceptual sense. So when we're isolating, there's a couple big things that we want to be paying attention to. First of all, who's the limper? What do they look like? Are they likely to limp call, limp fold, or limp re-raise? I usually am not going to assume they're going to limp re-raise me too much, but I certainly keep it in mind if I've seen them do it in the past. I think about their range that they're likely to limp with. There's a difference between, say, a fishy person who's limping, because that could be a ton of different hands, versus more of a nitty opponent who maybe is just limping with their set minds or their suited connectors, and they have a very predictable range when they decide to do this. So think about that as well, and then think about big things like who's behind you. If you isolate this limper or these multiple limpers, are you likely to get 3-bet a lot of the time? What are you likely to get called, and then all of a sudden you get a bunch of callers, and then you have this huge multi-way pot? If you expect that, we don't want to choose a range that's very weak. We want to choose a range that's very strong side weighted. So it's the kind of situation where you have to look at a bunch of different things. As always, who are your opponents, who's left if you do decide to get aggressive, and then of course think about little details like your size. So if you choose a smaller isolation size, you're probably going to see a flop every single time. If you choose a larger size, are you going to see a flop, or are people going to fold pre-flop a large chunk of the time? Because if it's a kind of situation where you get a limper, you can make a large raise, and they're going to fold a large chunk of the time, well, that's a really profitable situation for you, and your cards don't really matter all that much in that situation either. So beyond just those general considerations, the other big thing, of course, is our cards and our range that we want to use here. So the big things that I kind of look for when I'm choosing a range, obviously other than the other things that I just spoke about, is either 1, having card edge when they continue, and or 2, having a profitable plan if they continue. So obviously the more limpers that there are, the more difficult this is going to be to raise here, right? Because likely at least one of them is going to call, and once one calls, everyone wants to call, and then we have this huge multi-way pot. So it's the kind of situation where I don't really want to choose a weak range of hands if I'm going to get involved in a situation where I know I'm going to see a flop, and it's going to be multi-way, and I have something junky like 10-7 suited. Not really a great situation for me. So I need to be thinking ahead in that regard, and 10-7 suited isn't going to have card edge, and it doesn't have a very profitable plan either, other than hoping that you smash the flop. So there are some times when you're just going to isolate against a fishy opponent, you're going to choose a strong range, and having position makes it that much better, and you're just going to isolate and go from there. Now, you just want to be careful with some of the smaller stuff. Like if you have, say, pocket 4s and there's a fish, do you really need to raise and isolate him? Or could you just limp behind, try to create a more multi-way pot, let other people limp behind as well, and then have a better situation for your set mine? So it's a situation where you can limp behind sometimes. Some people feel like you can just never limp behind, and there are good situations for it, especially in those where the isolation just isn't all that great and doesn't accomplish the goals you have. So having card edge on their continuance range is very, very good, or a profitable plan. Is it the kind of person that's going to do a lot of limp calling pre-flop, but on the flop is it going to do a lot of just check folding and saying, well, I missed the flop, and they're going to miss the flop a large chunk of the time, and you can pick it up with an easy c-bet. Because if that's the case, your cards don't matter as much. So when you have that really profitable plan and you kind of understand, okay, could this just be a quick stab pre-flop, stab flop, and they're going to fold a ton, that could be a nice profitable, cheap, and easy play, and you know what you're going to do with the hand. There's no real question marks in that situation. So focus on card edge or profitable plan. I mean, obviously, if you have a great hand and you have a profitable plan, that's one of the greatest situations for you. But sometimes you're not always going to have a great hand, and other times you're not always going to have a great profitable plan. So as always, you need to think ahead and then create the most profitable range for that situation. So Ron, thanks for the great question. And if you or anyone else has a poker-related question, feel free to leave it on our Google Plus page. I'll leave a link for that in the description box. And please make sure to like and subscribe if you're enjoying this type of video. So same as always, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to let me know. Otherwise, good luck out there and happy grinding.